Well, it's let's go. It's about 10 o'clock, and thanks for those of you who've dialed in on a busy Tuesday morning. I'm Eric with FAC, and the name of today's webinar is Diving into the Digital Coast for Resilience. I came across this this initiative several years ago. I was introduced to Noaa'S Digital Coast while attending a conference of the National Association of Counties in Washington, and began looking at the data sets that they had. And I really was only scraping the surface. I was fascinated by what it could do for projecting things for like sea level rise. But again, I was just scraping the surface. And so what I wanted to do, I'm cheating a little bit here, and was looking at the back end of the NOAA's Office of Coastal Management and Digital Coast on what this really does. And they say it's more than just data, and it really is. And it's the Digital Coast was authorized by the Digital Coast Act and was developed to meet the unique needs of the coastal community. The website provides not only coastal data, but also the tools, training, and information needed to make these data truly useful. Data sets range from economic data to satellite imagery, contains visualization tools, predictive tools, and tools that make data easier to find. There's also training. And as you know, someone who used to be a land use planner in a previous life, where all we had were paper aerial maps and things like slosh models and looking at coastal high hazard area maps. Those were really just the basic tools that we had. And so I'm a little bit jealous when I began looking at these digital tools and took a deeper dive into what NOAA Digital Coast actually offers. It's really, I think, one of the best initiatives out there for looking at a broad range of issues relating to coastal management, coastal resilience, and really how to manage your community. And so with us today, I want to introduce our presenters. It's Marian Hanisco, is the Gulf Coast Learning Services Coordinator for NOAA's Office for Coastal Management in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I'm not going to read her entire bio. We're going to post this to our webpage at a later time, including their contact information if you want to reach out to them. Also with us is Tasha Allen. Tasha is the Southeast and Caribbean Learning Services Coordinator and a Risk Communication Trainer for NOAA's Office for Coastal Management in Charleston, South Carolina, one of my favorite towns. And also with us is Russell Jackson, also in Charleston, South Carolina, with NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. With that as background, I am going to turn it over to Marian, and she's going to get us kicked off. And if anyone has any questions, put them in the chat. I think we're going to do a small poll towards the end of this. We are also going to record, edit this, and so any colleagues that you have that was not able to watch this, we'll have this posted to the Studio 67 website. So, Marian, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, and thank you and your colleagues for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Sure thing. Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for inviting us to present this morning. We really appreciate this opportunity to share some resources with the Florida Association of Counties. As Eric mentioned, my name is Marian, and I'm located in Pascagoula, Mississippi. I work for the Office for Coastal Management, and my role is a Learning Services Coordinator for the Gulf region. And in that role, one of my responsibilities is to help connect customers to data and tools and training resources to help with coastal management decisions. And so that's really one of the reasons why we're gathering today, to learn about some of those products that are available through the Digital Coast platform. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But I wanted to mention the timing of this particular webinar, I think, is really good because we are quickly approaching the start of hurricane season. And in prepping for today's presentation with Tasha and Russell and others in our office, we chose some tools and products to share with you that we think will be really good for helping communities not only prepare for storm season, but also thinking about recovery from storm events. And we're also keenly aware that many of you are participating in the Resilient Florida program. So you may have done a vulnerability assessment or be working on a vulnerability assessment, or maybe even moving to the next step where you're working on an adaptation plan for your community. And so the tools and the resources that we highlight today, I think, will really help with those efforts as well. So just a nod to a couple of high-level topics that we hope to cover with you. We have, I guess, about an hour of your time this morning. We'll probably, present products for 30 or 40 minutes or so. We do plan to have, a few minutes left at the end for some Q&A, as Eric mentioned, and you're certainly welcome to type questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll try to keep an eye on the chat window and try to answer questions as we see them pop into the chat. So I am kicking us off. I'm going to give a little bit of a high level overview of our office and the Digital Coast platform, and then I'll turn it over to Russell and Tasha to talk more about the products themselves. So on that note, for those of you who may not be as aware of Noaa'S Office for Coastal Management, I just wanted to mention that, the scope of our office is national in extent and regional in approach. And by that, I mean, we serve the country and the territories, but we have staff embedded in the regions, which is really helpful in helping to, learn more about customer needs and connecting folks to products and services through our office. And our office is really keenly focused on helping coastal communities become more resilient, especially to flood. Very focused on supporting vibrant economies and healthy coastal ecosystems. And we do that primarily through 4 key programs, which are referenced here on the slide that you're seeing. So one of those programs is support for the National Coastal Zone Management Program, which is a federal-state partnership that is focused on implementing policy, right, and helping to balance tourism and development, and healthy ecosystems. And so in Florida, we work really closely with the Florida DEP to help implement the Coastal Management Program. We also support the National Estuarine Research Reserve System. So there are 30 reserves across the country, and they're focused on research and stewardship, training, and education. You all have 3 reserves in Florida, so we're good friends with Apalachicola, Rookery Bay, and the GTM Reserve here in Florida. The third program is the Coral Reef Conservation Program. So again, the state of Florida has, through DEP, a coral reef conservation program as well. And we, work to bring people together to share information about the health of coral ecosystems and to support their health in the long term. And then lastly, what we wanted to focus on today is talking more about the Digital Coast platform. And Eric gave you a little bit of a preview about what the Digital Coast is about. But before I tell you more, I want to pause here and ask Becky if she would be willing to launch our poll question. We just wanted to take the pulse of the audience and see how familiar you all are. Thank you. Yes, we appreciate seeing how familiar you all are with the platform as we start to talk about it. That gives us a little bit of information about you all and your familiarity with the Digital Coast. So as we begin to transition to the Digital Coast itself, I wanted to just add a few additional a little bit more description, I guess, to Eric's earlier explanation of the platform. So we say that the Digital Coast is more than a website, it's an enabling platform, which means that we're not just pointing our partners and customers to data, tools, and products, but we are providing technical assistance and training to help our customers really understand how to use the data and information here to inform coastal management decisions. And we work with a set of national partners who are listed on this slide. Several of those organizations you're likely very familiar with. NACO is represented, National Association of Counties, Association of State Floodplain Managers too, for example. So these organizations, of course, have customers, located in coastal communities across the country, and they serve really as a touch point or a pulse for us just to make sure that the data and information and products that we're sharing are really super relevant and timely and really helping to inform decisions on the ground. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Russell, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about some of the products that you'll find on the Digital Coast.
So before we jump in and show you some of the tools, some of the things we're going to talk about a little bit, I'm going to show you an example of 3 of the tools available on Digital Coast, and you can easily find them on, if you look in this like sidebar from the Digital Coast website, there are links to find information where you can access data, where you can access tools, and you can access a lot of our trainings. And Tasha's going to mention some of those trainings after I show you some of the tools. You could always also just search on the top right-hand side where you see that little kind of magnifying glass and search on anything like flooding or hurricanes or anything you're interested in. And you'll probably find a wealth of information that applies to that topic. One other thing before I move on is right below where it says training, there's also these stories. And every one of the tools I'm going to show you we have these things called stories from the field, where we have examples of how communities have actually taken a lot of the tools that I'm about to show you and applied them to help them manage their coastal areas. You can go next, Marion. Okay, so the very first tool I want to tell you a little bit about is the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper. And this is really a great resource to kind of get the conversation started about where flooding is occurring and where it may occur in your community. It's a great way because you can actually share maps that you create with this tool with your community members. One thing I want to point out with this slide before we kind of jump in and show you some of it is what it kind of said. This is the launch page if you were to go in Digital Coast and you hit that button getting started. But what it says there is kind of really what this tool is all about. It's really just to jumpstart community discussions about local coastal flooding hazards by developing maps that show where people, places, and natural resources are at risk. So it's kind of a really good screening level tool. And Tasha and I both, this tool was kind of born out of work that we used to do where we would go and sit with communities and kind of help them do risk and vulnerability assessments related to coastal flooding. And we'd sit around, we'd print out really big maps and sit around tables and work with community members to find out what some of the issues they have related to flooding. We'd show them where the flood hazard zones are, and they tell us more about some of the resources in those areas. So we kind of created this tool to help communities that don't have their own mapping capabilities to print maps and be able to use them either printed or digitally on screen to start these conversations. You can go to the next slide. So once you launch the mapper, this is kind of what it looks like. You can always search at the top right-hand side. For any location, you could just type in the city where you live and it would zoom right to it. You can also at the bottom right kind of change the base map from this to an aerial photo if you wanted that instead. There's some other options. You can turn the legend on and off. But on the left-hand side where you can't really see because it's just a slide, there's an area where you can interact with the different layers, the GIS layers that are on this tool. And the coastal flood hazards that are available on this tool, you can see here there's a coastal flood hazard composite, which I'll kind of cover a little bit more in detail in a second. There's a high tide flooding layer. There's a FEMA flood zones. There's a tsunami inundation layer, hurricane storm surge layer, and sea level rise data. And if we were in the Great Lakes, there's also some Great Lakes water level data in there as well. And you can see that button right below that where it kind of says save map. That's one really cool, important feature about this, that any map that you create, once you zoom in and find something you really like, you can save it. And I'll show you how that is really useful in a second. You can go to the next slide, Marion. So the coastal flood composite layer, just so you know what that's made of, it's just a component of all those layers. So we have the high tide flooding. We have the higher risk FEMA flood zone. So you have the 1% chance, which is the 100-year flood zone. You also have the 500-year flood zone in there. For storm surge, we only include for this composite layer categories 1 through 3. We don't want to include every single layer in there. We're trying to highlight with this this layer, kind of the darker red from this layer is the area where more flood zones are likely to occur. So areas you may be more concerned about. And if an area floods from category 1 storm surge, it's going to flood from category 5 as well. So we're looking at the areas that might flood more frequently. So we also have sea level rise scenarios for 1 foot, 2 foot, and 3 foot included in this. We have the tsunami run-up zone and some Great Lakes data, which you don't really need to be concerned about. You can go to the next one, Mary. But also, in addition to having the coastal flood zone, hazard zones, you can interact with those zones with other societal exposure data, things like population density, areas where there's high concentration of poverty or high concentration of elderly folks. Also, where you have a high concentration of your employees. So you can look at what components of your society may be impacted by the various hazard layers. And you can also interact with some of the, let me make sure what the next slide is going to be. And you can also interact with some of the exposure data, infrastructure exposure data. So we have areas where there's high concentration of development. So areas where there's high, maybe concentration of impervious surface where you may have more issues in the future with flooding. You also can interact with where your critical facilities are, which one of those are going to be vulnerable to, say, hurricane storm surge. And also look at some development patterns in your area, some areas where development has been increasing in the more recent past. So areas you may be more concerned with. You can also interact with your ecosystem data as well, figure out where, your relationships of natural areas that may be providing flood storage now and your flood zones. There's also potential pollution sources, so areas that maybe during a flood that could cause some of those pollution sources these are usually EPA sites, that may leak out and harm some of your natural resources that are currently providing protection. You can go to the next slide as well. So, for example, if you had liked this image and you hit the save map, later on you can interact with all your save maps. So basically you could save, say, 20 different maps. You had a bunch of different maps you were really interested in, thought you want to interact with your community. You save them and you basically have like a shopping cart on Amazon, and you can go in there and interact with these at any time. You can download the maps, you can share them. Every time you save it, it creates a small URL link that will stay there forever. And long as you save that link, like if you hit the share collection button, it'll create a text file with all the links for you, and you can email that to somebody or save it to yourself. And so if I like this map and I created this URL and I send it to Marion right now, and we want to discuss this in a meeting, and we could be looking at the exact same map, and it would ensure that whatever layers I was interested in, she'd be looking at the same one. We've actually used this when we were working with some of our partners to try to identify areas, and people would be in different locations. We'd have people in Columbia, South Carolina, people in Charleston, and people in North Carolina, all talking about the same area. And we would use these maps to interact and discuss it a little bit. You can go to the next one. And the good thing about all those saved maps is they will persist forever. So, and even if you go and they're going to stay in your browser history, but even if you cleared your browser history, that will always work. So if I come in here 3 years from now and hit that link, it'll go to that same map. So it's a really good way to interact and be able to save maps and use them later on. I can't even remember you can go to the next slide. I'm not really sure. So the next thing I want to tell you about a little bit is the sea level rise viewer. And the sea level rise data that's in our sea level rise viewer is in that coastal flood exposure mapper that I just showed you. We have just made some new improvements on the sea level rise viewer that we haven't included yet on the coastal flood exposure mapper. And I'll just let you know about that real quick. The sea level rise viewer allows you to interact with sea level rise data, inundation layers from 0 to 10 foot in half-foot increments. So the coastal flood exposure mapper also has 0 to 10 foot that you can interact with, but they're not in half-foot increments yet. We are working to include that pretty soon, but it hadn't been included yet. But the coastal flood exposure, the sea level rise viewer allows you to interact with this, and there's a slider bar on the left-hand side here where you can just slide it anywhere between 0 to 10 foot in half-foot increments and look at how those different scenarios may impact your area. There's also images at certain, they're not like anybody's house, but they're public resources like the Tampa Convention Center here that you can look at what those scenarios. So if I were to slide that slider bar, which now is showing at 4 foot, it shows you what the inundation level would be at that convention center at 4 foot. If I slid it a little bit higher, like say 6 foot, it would rise a couple more feet and show you how that would be impacted. And when you interact with this, you can see on this map here, there's a couple areas where that red arrow is, and a little bit above it to the right hand side, there's different gauges, and you have to kind of click a gauge closest to your location to figure out what's, it relies on kind of gauge data. So you want to find the closest gauge to your area and interact with that. And that'll allow you to interact. If you go to the next slide, it'll allow you to interact with some of the scenario data. So things you can do here, this is showing the scenarios from the NOAA technical report that came out in 2022. This is the sea level rise projections that were used in the National Climate Assessment NCAA 5 that came out in 2023, which hopefully will get updated in NCAA 6 if it ever happens in 2027. But this allows you to interact with the scenarios from that report. So if, for example, if you look in this area near St. Petersburg, and for the intermediate high scenario, it tells you that intermediate high in 2100 would be 5.35 feet. Our mapper, the slider bar doesn't go to 5.35 feet, but you could go first and look at 5 foot and see what that looks like, and also then go to 5.5 foot and see what that looks like. And you're going to be somewhere in between those two areas. So to give you a good idea of what area may flood by 2100, or if you were more interested in 2060, it's close to 2 foot. So you could slide that down to a 2 foot and see what areas are going to be impacted. You can go to the next one, Mary. And what it also allows you to do, part of this tool, besides interacting with some socioeconomic data, there's a marsh migration component of this as well. And what this is showing is sort of what the impacts are going to be for on marshes, and what's the likelihood that they potentially would be able to potentially migrate. So it really gives you some idea of what wetlands are going to be inundated and maybe become open ocean later on, and not necessarily wetlands. What areas might help you figure out what areas to focus in on some of your monitoring, your restoration efforts, and maybe conservation efforts to try to deal with what some of those marsh migration impacts may be in your area. Another component of the tool, I think if you go to the next slide, Marion, is it shows you high tide flooding. That coastal flood exposure mapper also has high tide flooding in here, and you can look at high tide flooding. We have 3 different scenarios: the minor, moderate, and major high tide flooding. This will show you how high tide flooding is changing and will change over time with sea level rise. So you can go to the next one, Mary. So the newest tool that we have kind of related to sea level rise is a partnership that we just worked with the National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, NCOS. They're the ones who do a lot of our water level gauges, and NOAA worked with them to create the sea level calculator. And what this is going to do is provide access to a lot more data on water levels and sea level rise data, as well as kind of seasonal data as well. So what this does at the sea level calculator, when you enter this, you can also just search by a location. If you go to the next slide, Marion. And what this is going to do is depending on the location, we have over a century worth of data in one location in certain areas. Like the tide gauge here in Charleston, South Carolina, is been around since 1900. So it's been around for well over a decade, century. I think one example I'm going to show you, the gauge hasn't been around as long, but it's going to show you the observed tide gauge data, sea level rise projections, as well as that inundation mapping that you saw in some of the other tools already. So you can go to the next slide. And when we created this is kind of brand new. It just came out at the around October, I think, is when we released the beta, and a later version finalized right after that. But we worked with practitioners to find out what their needs were so that we could create a tool to help them meet their needs. And we talked to a lot of floodplain managers, emergency managers, and some of the things they were interested in trying to set thresholds of when water levels are going to impact their community, things they need to be concerned about. Like I know here in Charleston, South Carolina, our emergency managers know when the tide levels get to 7 foot mean low water, they know that there's a problem, and they know flooding is going to start to occur. So that's kind of a trigger point for them. And then what they want to know is, like, in the future, when is that 7 foot going to be the normal high tide, or some of the thresholds that they have and they work with now, when is that going to be more of a problem? So some of the things we were considering when we kind of created this tool. So some other things, here we go. So the way it's broken down is there's 5 different quick views in this tool that allow you to look at different things. You can look at future sea levels. You can look at changes in flood frequency, extreme water levels, observe sea level trends, and seasonal variation. When you go in here, if you look at the top left on each one of those, it says there's a video. And there's a really good, really short, quick video. They're only like a couple minutes long that tell you what this quick view is going to help you, what it shows you, and how you can use it a little bit. So you can go to the next slide. I'm just going to quickly go through this because I don't want to go, I think we might already be running over. But so one thing on here, there is a frequently asked questions section. When you go in there, if you kind of just scroll down a little bit, when you first enter it, it'll tell you a lot of things. Why is it called a calculator? Is there a glossary for some of the terms? And where does the data come from? And all the data you can access, and you can get access to the data on your own as well. So you can go to the next one. So this is kind of an example when you come in. This is Virginia Key in Florida. And there you can see there's a gauge here, and there's information related at the gauge as well as some regional data as well. But sometimes the regional data doesn't have as many quick views available. So for this gauge, if you look there, it says kind of under Virginia Key on the bottom, it says quick views 5. There's a 5 above it. So all 5 are available for this. There's enough data. Some cases, a gauge may not have been around long enough for some of these things to work. And you can see this gauge in this case has been around since 1994 to the present. So you can go on to the next one. So just to show you some of the things you can get at each of the gauges when you go in. This is future sea levels for Virginia Key. So this kind of gives you those projections from the NOAA technical report that I mentioned came out in 2022 that the National Climate Assessment is based on. And things you can do here is, if you look on the left-hand side, you can change the datum. Right now, it's a mean sea level. If you wanted to know what it is related to, like the ground elevation near your house, you can change that to NAVD 88, so you have it in the same reference system. You can, and right now there's a threshold of 2 just showing. But say you were concerned in your community about 3.5 foot is just something, maybe a certain road starts to flood, and you want to know when that's going to occur more often, and based on the different scenarios when that's going to occur, you can change the thresholds as well. And the map will always change and show you information as well. So you can go to the next one. Okay. So for future sea levels, things you can see, like for that threshold that was set, it was set at 2 foot mean sea level. So it tells you under the different scenarios. So let's just say under the intermediate high scenario, which is a pretty good one to plan to if you're worried about certain things like something critical like a hospital. You can see that the average sea level will exceed that 2 foot threshold that you set. If that's some area of concern for you that you know you're going to have problems, average sea level is going to exceed that by 2062. But even more importantly, the average high tide, because that's just average sea levels. High tide is a little higher than sea level. So, the average high tide is going to exceed that 2 foot threshold by 2039. And, more than likely that's happening twice a day. So it's going to be a problem way before it actually gets to the mean sea level gets to that height. You can go to the next one. So there's a lot of wealth of information. I'm just going to go through it real quickly. Another one you can get is, the changes in flood frequency. So at this gauge, we can see annual flood days, how often the flooding has occurred. You can see this gauge has only been around since '94, but early 2000s, there weren't a lot of flooding, and you can see it's definitely gone up a lot more in more recent times. You go to the next slide. I think there's a little chart here. You could see that from like 20 to 2029, I mean 20 to 2000 to 2009, there was only less than one flooding day a year, and since 2020 to last year, there's four flooding days a year. So we can see how it's starting to increase. You can go to the next one. Another quick view in here is extreme water levels. You can go to the next slide. I think it shows it a little bit easier. So what this does, extreme water levels, it gives you the top 10 water level events in that area. So you can see the highest water level recorded was during Hurricane Irma at this area in September 10th, 2017. And you can see Hurricane Wilma was most of the highest water levels were all hurricane related, the top four. And then there were some others that were just to have an idea of what the highest ones are. And you can go to the next one. And this next one is observed sea level trends. This is kind of the trend of what's happening. If you go to the next slide, and usually you'll see all this on just one screen. We're just trying to pull it all together for the PowerPoint. But what this does is it shows you at that station, at that gauge, what the long-term sea level trend is, as well as any contribution related to vertical land motion. And when I talk about vertical land motion, I'm talking either subsidence, which we have a lot in the Southeast, versus maybe in Alaska, they actually have a lot of uplift. So they're actually seeing the elevation rise versus we're seeing it subside a little bit. So you can kind of see what the contribution of sea level rise as well as subsidence might be. There's some regional trends as well. You can see how that one gauge might be doing compared to regional as well as global, just to see if you're kind of on track and see how that's going and what the future trends may be. You can go to the next one, Marion. And then we all know there's kind of seasonal variations, and this is good for planners to know what times a year you might be more important to you. So we can see at this Virginia Key gauge, most of the highest number of flooding events occurs in October. September is pretty close. And if we go to the next slide, you can see most of the ones in September, as I pointed out before, are hurricane related. Well, not all of them, and October, early season, we see some of those Octobers are hurricane related, but they're not always hurricane. Like the second and third ones shown there are just higher above normal tides. Sometimes just above normal, like what people are calling king tides, and others king tides combined with onshore winds makes it even higher. But those are the times a year that might help planners figure out when they might be more concerned about some tidal flooding. You can go to the next one. So I know that was a real quick overview, and we can go in more detail later if someone's really concerned and wants to know more about it. But all the data and all of those tools that I showed you are all available as well that you can download and interact with in your own GIS or your own systems as well. But with that, I'll turn it over to Tasha to talk a little bit about training.
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, so I wanted to give you all just a quick overview of our training section on our Digital Coast. And one of the things is that we have virtual and in-person trainings, but we also have quite a few on demand. So if you have a learning need that comes up, you don't want to leave your office, we have those types of resources as well. And then another thing I really wanted to underscore is that we do provide technical assistance. So that would be you calling us or emailing us and saying, hey, I have a few questions. I'm not sure where to go from here. Do you have a resource that can help me? And so we have, many resources within the Digital Coast, and we're more than happy to dive deeper into the resources that Russell showed. Some of the resources I'm talking about are other ones as well. Also, we work very closely with a lot of state and federal and local partners. And so if it's something that we maybe not are able to provide help on, we can always get you connected to another partner that might have some of those resources. So this is our Digital Coast training section. You can access our training resources a couple different ways. There's a find button. We have those on-demand resources. And these are the different types of on-demand learning resources that we have. So we have, interactive guides, case studies, publications. We have recorded webinars. And then we also have virtual and in-person training. So I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into this section. Next slide, Marion. So I just wanted to show you, when you hit that find button, we have many different coastal management and process skills that we cover in the training section, such as risk communication, facilitation, community engagement, green infrastructure, coastal and ocean economic planning. So I just wanted to give you an idea of the different topics that we cover. I'm going to get us started in talking about risk communication, since this webinar is focused in on preparedness and resilience. So next slide, Marion. So we have a pretty robust risk communication products and services portfolio. What we're really focused in on in this portfolio is helping build your skills or enhance your skills in connecting with people, so that you're connecting the risk to what matters to them. And so we have a 90-minute webinar where we go into risk communication best practices. We have the ability to customize that webinar a little bit, where we could do a hybrid, where you can dive in a little bit deeper to one of our tools, which is the risk communication strategy. We also have self-guided modules. So again, if you have a few questions, you need some tips on risk communication, you can go into that self-guided module. We have CEUs connected to almost all of our trainings. And then also the technical assistance piece. This is the part that we love to do. So we love to, I say, geek out on risk communication. And so this is really where we could work with you to help you either work through a strategy, to brainstorm thinking about how to connect with certain audiences, and just us sharing our experiences and our knowledge. Okay, next slide, Marion. We also have different learning resources focused in on coastal adaptation planning. I know that y'all are working through the Resilient Florida program, and there's different resources there on risk and vulnerability assessments, also on adaptation strategies. This is really meant to be for kind of that beginner crowd. So folks that maybe are kind of new to coastal adaptation planning and need a framework. And so what we do is we walk you through this, those different steps there. This does a really great job of giving you an explanation of what you would do in each of those steps. So it's really very action focused. We have some lessons learned and pitfalls based upon our own work and working with different communities on doing adaptation planning. And then also my favorite part of the case study. So what does this really look like in the real world, and how are people doing those steps? We also have several virtual trainings focused in on this topic as well. And again, that technical assistance. All right, next slide, Mary. Another focus area of ours is helping people identify what different types of funding and financing mechanisms are out there. We know that this is a huge need, and it can be a barrier for moving forward on your preparedness and your resilience activities. And so we started this webinar series several years ago, and what we're doing is we're spotlighting how communities are funding and financing their community resilience projects, mainly nature-based solutions projects. And so we have several different ones that we've gone through, such as environmental impact bonds, building capacity in communities, access funding, looking at stormwater credit trading, public-private partnerships. And so these are available on our Digital Coast training section. These are recorded webinars. And then there's also associated resources linked to these. We are going to be focused in on our next webinar is going to be focused in on using fees. And so we're going to be showcasing a couple of communities that are looking at different fees and how they're using those to invest in nature-based solutions. If you have any needs or ideas around funding, please let us know. We definitely like to figure out what is most needed and where to kind of go from here. We're really thinking about also maybe with federal grants maybe becoming less and less, maybe looking at how communities are stacking funding in absence of federal grants, and what does that look like? Next slide. We also have a pretty robust portfolio of learning resources on nature-based solutions. This is an example of a self-guided module that's part of our longer trainings. And this one really just walks you through the basics of nature-based solutions, and then walks you through a planning framework that we've developed to help you start thinking about your nature-based solution strategies. This is really good for if people are new to nature-based solutions, thinking about if you're working with folks within your community or you're working with your elected officials. It's a really good kind of a starter. We showcase a couple of case studies. There's actually a Florida case study in there from Alachua County. And then also what you do is we use this in our training. So this is our part one of our training. So you're actually starting to apply what you're learning to your own situation. And then we explore that and dig deeper into those issues in our virtual trainings. Okay, next slide. This is another popular resource. We hear a lot that communities really need to know about how effective nature-based solutions are to reducing coastal hazard impacts. So we put this database together several years ago, and it's really focused in on us collecting literature, reports, different projects that are really focused on measuring how effective green infrastructure is to reducing coastal hazard impacts. About a year ago, we made a modification to this. I'm super excited about that. And it's really looking at the economics of green infrastructure. So looking at the costs and benefits and research and reports and case studies that focused in on those as well, because that's a huge need as well of when communities are having to do different economic analysis to show that these are beneficial and you do get a return on investment. So that's an addition. What you do in this is you can choose your location, you can choose your nature-based solutions, you can choose a year, and then it just returns you different resources based upon your search criteria. So it's a searchable database. And then what we've done is we've gone through each of those literature sources and we pulled out just some key findings, the types of nature-based solutions that are being looked at, and then also the different parts of the nature-based solutions that were measured for effectiveness. Okay, next slide, Marion. And then also we know that stories are so important, really trying to understand how communities are tackling a lot of these different coastal hazard issues, coastal resilience issues. So we have, I think 36 now case studies. And really what we do is, this is really focused on peer-to-peer sharing. And so how are these communities tackling some of these issues? What was their process? What were lessons learned? What tools did they use? How did they fund that project? Who did they partner with? And the idea is that then you could you get that kind of overview information, and then you can connect actually with that peer to learn more. The topics we've got covered are nature-based solutions, case studies, community engagement, resilience planning, and risk communication. So if you have any case study ideas that you'd like to showcase, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to explore those more with you. Okay, next slide, Marion. Russell mentioned this. This is also a major section on Digital Coast. It's the stories. And so this is how you can learn how people are using the Digital Coast. We get asked that question a lot of like, do you have an example of how the coastal flood exposure mapper was used, or the sea level rise viewer, or, you know, who are you training? How are they using that information? So these stories go into, you know, how communities, what problems they're trying to tackle, what issues they're tackling, and then how they were able to use those resources. So I think this is a really, really great resource. Next slide. And then this has to be my favorite section of the Digital Coast. There's a lot of things in the Digital Coast. It's really well organized, but I love this curated list of resources. So this again is accessed on that main toolbar on the left-hand side, and it's our topics. And you can see the different coastal management topics that we focus in on. And so if you were to click on one of those, such as risk communication, you'd be linked to a curated list of risk communication resources that are available on the Digital Coast. For us, it's really a good place to get people started, and it really highlights some of our more popular tools, or tools that we feel that can really be useful in getting you started, or to even dig a little bit deeper in these different topic areas. All right, next slide. And again, this is the Digital Coast. We would love to be able to connect with you. If you have any additional questions, or if you go back to your office and you're like, oh gosh, I really would like to learn a little bit more, or this is, a question or a gap I have in my knowledge, just give us a call or email us. Mary, you can slip it to the next or advance to the next slide. This is our contact information. And yeah, just connect with us. We'd love to talk with you more about what you're working on. And then also we'd love to get some feedback. This is something that we're really big on too, is how can we improve our products and services? So just that's a QR code, and just let us know how we did today. And that's basically what we have for our diving into Digital Coast. So we can answer questions now. Thank you.
Everyone, Tasha, Mary, and Russell, thank you so much for that. And I know it sounds like hyperbole, but when I see what you just presented, it shows even more of how deep and how robust this website, these tools are. They're amazing. I do have a couple of questions, if I may, and this goes back to risk communication. And you talked about, connecting risk to what matters. And I think my real question is, I'm thinking back to the 2024 hurricane season, and not a couple, but several communities down in South Florida. Let's talk about Pinellas as maybe one of those ground zero areas where older properties were built before flood maps were in place. Slab on grade, they're older homes. They were substantially damaged, and no one knew what substantially damaged was. If you've been living in this house that was built in the 1950s and you may have inherited from a relative. So I just want to talk about that. Is that something that some of these tools can help in terms of communicating risk? Is that what we're talking about? At least in part, not everything, but that's what comes to mind, because post-disaster, we've talked to a lot of the county administrators, EM folks, and the people who are dealing with the recovery. That was a big issue, and I see where a couple of counties have done really good job post-disaster and saying, hey, these are the rules, and yes, they're not great, and we're doing everything we can to help you rebuild. But I'm thinking, under blue skies, can you use this to communicate that risk? That's really my question in short.
Russell, do you want me to take it, or okay, or do you want to start?
You can start. And
okay, a couple of things come to mind. I think it's sort of a multi-prong challenge. I think an opportunity is so the coastal flood exposure mapper, that first tool that Russell showed, I think that's a good first glance, kind of what we call screening level, to see what you may be exposed to. Again, you can only zoom in so far. It doesn't give you, all the information, but I do think that is a good kind of awareness. And really, like what Russell's talking about, is having those conversations, right? Really trying to identify who in your community is at risk, and are they even aware of what their risks might be, what their exposure is. And so some of it is using that tool, but it's also getting out there and having those conversations and really trying to connect with community members and really trying to understand, what do they know, what don't they know, how prepared they really are. Because maybe some people just aren't aware. They might not understand their risks. So it's really looking at those. It's also looking at maybe some barriers that are standing in place. So I do feel like that. I think you could use that as a beginner. And then I think it's also just, working with your local, your county and your municipal officials that are really focused in on this, on preparedness and flooding information. I know Pinellas County has some great resources. Their floodplain manager is amazing. And I know that there's a lot of good resources there that they're trying to put out to help educate people. And I think it's also, like I know Pinellas County's worked really closely with real estate professionals, and they've done some tools there to try to educate people that might be newer to the area. So again, it's trying to work with people that are connecting with these different audiences too. So I do think it's kind of a multi-pronged approach. Russell, do you have something you want to add?
yeah, I think I would just add also, I mentioned most of all the data you can download and access through your own system. So if local community has their own GIS and they have information on like homes built before the National Flood Insurance Program, they could easily merge those data sets and start, have some kind of campaign with residents or target some of their campaigns in those areas to let them know. And in a lot of cases, most people don't even know about flood insurance until they go buy a house and the mortgage says you got to get flood insurance. So they never even heard about it. And what they don't understand is that, it's just based on that 100-year flood elevation, which was historical data. It's not projected with future data. And with the tool like the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, you can also at least start showing what areas are vulnerable to hurricane storm surge, which is well beyond the 100-year flood. But they may not realize that they could potentially get flooded because they hadn't been flooded in 50 years. But with the hurricane, they easily could. So it's a really good way to encourage people that don't have flood insurance, why they might want to get flood insurance from these other potential flood risks, or showing how with sea level rise and other things, they may, and the tool like that calculator, where some of these things that were a 50-year flood event might become a 10-year flood event in the future, so that 100-year is going to get worse. And some of these tools might help encourage people to take on some of this mitigation besides insurance, but also maybe elevating their houses or other things they could do as well. So these tools can really help at least target some of that risk communication effort.
And I guess, the tools are only good as the data that goes into them. And you showed very well that you do have a data source page, so you can go to the actual data inputs that are there. Is there ever, in your thought, are we providing too many different, and I don't mean Digital Coast, there's a lot of different models. There's different data that's out there. A county may have adopted, the basic firm maps from FEMA, and maybe it adds, as a part of its building code, a foot of freeboard for areas that are in the, seaward of the coastal construction control line or whatever. My thought is that there's a lot of data out there. Is it too much? And how do we help local governments kind of weed through this and make sure that they are, I think, selectively and appropriately using the right data?
Do you want to start, Russell? Anything you want to say?
You can start. One thing is that all of our tools and resources we have are all publicly available data and from data sets that typically are updated on an annual basis. All of our tools we maintain and update all the time. Like that sea level calculator is based on gauge data that is updated daily, and several times a day. So we try to make sure that we are providing access to the latest and greatest information. But we realize that local communities at the local level may have a need for a higher resolution data set than we can provide at a national scale. A lot of our tools are trying to get the conversation started. I think something like that, the sea level calculator, can definitely be zoomed in and used at a local level more than, say, the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, which is more just to get the conversation started. But it's really hard for us as a national organization to stay up with what every local community is doing. Like you mentioned, they may have FEMA adopted their own freeboard that we don't know about, so we can't put that on our maps. But I think our maps and some of the trainings, like that Tasha mentioned, of how to go about communicating risk in your community, can help a local community figure out, using the resources we have and others. And we do here, there's so many tools out there. Every agency has things. The sea level calculator is actually supposed to be multi-agency. We have NASA data in there, and we're trying to work with USGS on the next version of it to get even more data from other agencies, so we're not all having our own tools. So there is a push for some of that, but it's just hard for us to keep up with what's going on locally with some higher resolution stuff. I don't know if you want to add on to that, Tasha, or something.
I think just to add on to that is, like Russell said, we link to the authoritative source of that data And then I think that, Russell alluded to partnerships, right? So we are definitely trying to, we see the value in partnerships. And so, trying to coordinate and work together across the federal family, but then also locally, right? We work with a lot of local partners, the state coastal programs, the NEARS, other state agencies. And the idea is that, through those partnerships and also through us connecting and talking and doing technical assistance, we can really try to identify what the real needs are. And then, what is maybe the appropriate tool or data source. It may not always be our resources. So that's part of that technical assistance. There may be something that the state has that we don't have, or something that the county has or municipality. So it's kind of a combination of things.
Can I just also add to that? We hear the concern about tool overwhelm a lot. And we have added some features to the Digital Coast website, including like some key questions that users can answer about like where their geography of focus is, what type of application are they looking for, to help sort through and narrow the list of tools that the Digital Coast will then provide links to try to help do a better job of connecting users to tools that will answer their questions. And I also wanted to share another tool for the Gulf audience. So this one is called Gulf Tree, which was developed by some of our partners who are affiliated with the Gulf of America Alliance Resilience Team. And this tool is designed like specifically to take users through a list of questions to help filter and narrow the list of tools and products down, again, to help do a better job of connecting people to tools that really help answer their questions. Sorry, my office light goes out if I don't like stand up and walk around. So anyway, so I wanted to share the Gulf Tree tool as well. And we also link to it on the Digital Coast website. So just wanted to put that out there as a resource for folks.
I just have maybe one or two more questions as we wrap up the hour. And Russell, under the Save Maps, the My Map feature, I was wondering whether or not a local government can add data. In other words, they want to add additional critical facilities that are in there. I'm not sure what the data source is when that gets pulled in, but do they have the ability to contribute and add additional data points?
No, unfortunately, on the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, you can only interact with the data that we have on there. The critical facilities actually comes from the USGS National Structures Database that most states and have been working with, like especially for critical facilities. States work with local governments to get that updated kind of on a regular basis. But the good thing about it is, and we have information on the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, for example, how you can take the web services and use the data that we have in your own local GIS, if you have it, and merge it with your own data set. So if you have your own critical facilities database, or even your structure database of all your houses or other commercial buildings or something that you might be concerned about, you can merge our data with that data in your own GIS and interact with it. But unfortunately, we can't add anything on our system. It's just it's too complicated.
Got it. So last question, as Russell, as you were talking, I was pulling up the sea level slide that had the Tampa Bay Convention Center, which I thought was pretty cool visual. Are there, I guess, two questions. One, are there others examples that are out there that can be incorporated or have thought about? Because if I was a local official and saw that, I'd be like, hey man, this is, we need to do something about this before we have 4 foot of surge. That's my first question, because I think a picture is more valuable than some of the rhetoric or written words. And then the second question is, has any validation been done from the 2024 season based on some of what actually happened on the ground and some of the models that are in Digital Coast?
Well, for one, they have added they have been working over the years to add more images. We always try to use like local landmarks. And usually they're landmarks kind of close to the gauge location because it's more accurate the closer you are to the gauge. We are working right now with co-ops to kind of get better information away from the gauge, a new kind of gridded product that the sea level calculator has some of it, but it should get better. So in the future, so we would be able to do like landmarks like further away from the gauge. Like for example, I don't know if you'll know, I just know Charleston better, but like in between Charleston and Savannah, there's no gauge. So Hilton Head area, Beaufort, there's no gauge. So you have to kind of figure out which gauge to use. And there are significant differences between those two gauges. With the new gridded product, it'll be a lot better, and we'd be able to do more images in between the gauges once we have this gridded product done that they're working on right now. So we do look for more opportunities to add more images, and I think we'll add more in the future. And what was the second part of the question?
Just about validating some of the modeling that based on the 2024 storms.
Well, I mean, the storm surge data that we have in the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper, just so you know, and if you've been involved with any hurricane evacuation planning, it's the hurricane storm surge MOM, what they call the MOM, the maximum, which is the worst case scenario. It will never happen from just one storm. It's a combination of 1,000 different runs for like 1,000 different Category 4 storms run at different locations, different angles of approach and different speeds. And they take the worst flooding in every grid cell and add it. So it's like a worst case scenario. But the Hurricane Center does always every year after every storm kind of rerun the models and look at the slosh model and see if there's any improvements that are needed. And they're usually pretty accurate. One good thing about using the tool, especially in the coming hurricane season, what you can do, if you see your the Hurricane Center or your local forecast office saying expect storm surge maybe 6 to 8 foot, you can use either the Coastal Flood Exposure Mapper or that sea level rise viewer and use that slider bar and just go up 6 foot on the slider bar, and it'll give you a good idea of what area is going to potentially flood with 6 foot of sea level rise. 6 foot of storm surge. So that's a good way that a lot of people have been using both of those tools when storms approach to get an idea of what area may actually flood if you do get, say, 6 foot of surge or 10 foot of surge.
It's scary and fantastic all at once. But let me go ahead and wrap this up since we're just past the hour mark. It was, I think, a long time coming trying to get you guys to come on and do a webinar. Appreciate the information and appreciate all the work that y'all do. And thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Yes,
Right.
thank you.
Take care. Thank you.